Section 4 of An Editor's Tales by Anthony Trollope. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Mary Gresley, continued. We must not allow our readers to suppose that the intensity of our application had arisen from the overwhelming interest of the story. It was not that the story entranced us, but that our feeling for the writer grew as we read the story. It was simple, unaffected, and almost painfully unsensational. It contained, as I came to perceive afterwards, little more than a recital of what her imagination told her might too probably be the result of her own engagement. It was the story of two young people who became engaged and could not be married. After a course of years, the man, with many true arguments, asked to be absolved. The woman yields with an expressed conviction that her lover is right, settles herself down for maiden life, then breaks her heart and dies. The character of the man was utterly untrue to nature. That of the woman was true, but commonplace. Other interest or other character there was none. The dialogues between the lovers were many and tedious, and hardly a word was spoken between them which two lovers really would have uttered. It was clearly not a work as to which I could tell my little friend that she might depend on it for fame or fortune. When I had finished it, I was obliged to tell myself that I could not advise her even to publish it. But yet I could not say that she had mistaken her own powers, or applied herself to a profession beyond her reach. There were a grace and delicacy in her work which were charming. Occasionally she escaped from the trammels of grammar, but only so far that it would be a pleasure to point out to her errors. There was not a sound that a young lady should not have written, and there were throughout the whole evident signs of honest work. We had 6 days to think it over between our completion of the task and her second visit. She came exactly at the hour appointed, and seated herself at once in the arm-chair before us as soon as the young man had closed the door behind him. There had been no great occasion for nervousness at her first visit, and she had then, by an evident effort, overcome the diffidence incidental to a meeting with a stranger. But now she did not attempt to conceal her anxiety. "Well," she said, leaning forward and looking up into our face with her 2 hands folded together. Even though truth, standing full panoplied at our elbow, had positively demanded it, we could not have told her then to mend her stockings and bake her pies and desert the calling that she had chosen. She was simply irresistible, and would, we fear, have constrained us into falsehood had the question been between falsehood and absolute reprobation of her work. To have spoken hard, heart-breaking words to her would have been like striking a child when it comes to kiss you. We fear that we were not absolutely true at first, and that by that absence of truth we made subsequent pain more painful. "Well," she said, looking up into our face, "have you read it?" We told her that we had read every word of it. "And it is no good?" We fear that we began by telling her that it certainly was good, after a fashion very good, considering her youth and necessary inexperience, very good indeed. As we said this she shook her head, and sent out a spark or two from her eyes, intimating her conviction that excuses or quasi-praise founded on her youth would avail her nothing. "Would anybody buy it from me?" she asked. No, we did not think that any publisher would pay her money for it. "Would they print it for me without costing me anything?" Then we told her the truth as nearly as we could. She lacked experience, and if, as she had declared to us before, she was determined to persevere, she must try again, and must learn more of that lesson of the world's ways which was so necessary to those who attempted to teach that lesson to others. "But I shall try again at once," she said. We shook our head, endeavoring to shake it kindly. "Currer Bell was only a young girl when she succeeded," she added. The injury which Currer Bell did after this fashion was almost equal to that perpetrated by Jack Sheppard. And yet Currer Bell was not very young when she wrote. She remained with us then for above an hour, for more than 2 probably, though the time was not specially marked by us, and before her visit was brought to a close she had told us of her engagement with the curate. Indeed, we believe that the greater part of her little history, as hitherto narrated, was made known to us on that occasion. We asked after her mother early in the interview, and learned that she was not on this occasion kept waiting at the pastrycook's shop. Mary had come alone, making use of some friendly omnibus of which she had learned the route. When she told us that she and her mother had come up to London solely with the view of forwarding her views in her intended profession, we ventured to ask whether it would not be wiser for them to return to Cornborough, seeing how improbable it was that she would have matter fit for the press within any short period. Then she explained that they had calculated that they would be able to live in London for 12 months, if they spent nothing except on absolute necessaries. The poor girl seemed to keep back nothing from us. "We have clothes that will carry us through, and we shall be very careful. I came in an omnibus, but I shall walk if you will let me come again." Then she asked me for advice. How was she to set about further work with the best chance of turning it to account? It had been altogether the fault of that retired literary gentleman down in the North, who had obtained what standing he had in the world of letters by writing about guano and the cattle plague. Divested of all responsibility, and fearing no further trouble to himself, he had ventured to tell this girl that her work was full of promise. Promise means probability, and in this case there was nothing beyond a remote chance. That she and her mother should have left their little household gods and come up to London on such a chance was a thing terrible to the mind. But we felt before these 2 hours were over that we could not throw her off now. We had become old friends, and there had been that between us which gave her a positive claim upon our time. She had sat in our arm-chair, leaning forward with her elbows on her knees and her hands stretched out, till we, caught by the charm of her unstudied intimacy, had wheeled round our chair and had placed ourselves, as nearly as the circumstances would admit, in the same position. The magnetism had already begun to act upon us. We soon found ourselves taking it for granted that she was to remain in London and begin another book. It was impossible to resist her. Before the interview was over, we, who had been conversant with all these matters before she was born, we, who had latterly come to regard our own editorial fault as being chiefly that of personal harshness, we, who had repulsed aspirant novelists by the score, we had consented to be a party to the creation, if not to the actual writing, of this new book. It was to be done after this fashion. She was to fabricate a plot, and to bring it to us, written on 2 sides of a sheet of letter paper. On the reverse sides we were to criticize this plot, and to prepare emendations. Then she was to make out skeletons of the men and women who were afterwards to be clothed with flesh, and made alive with blood, and covered with cuticles. After that she was to arrange her proportions, and at last, before she began to write the story, she was to describe in detail such part of it as was to be told in each chapter. On every advancing wavelet of the work we were to give her our written remarks. All this we promised to do, because of the quiver in her lip and the alternate tear and sparkle in her eye. "Now that I have found a friend, I feel sure that I can do it," she said, as she held our hand tightly before she left us. In about a month, during which she had twice written to us and twice been answered, she came with her plot. It was the old story, with some additions and some change. There was matrimony instead of death at the end, and an old aunt was brought in for the purpose of relenting and producing an income. We added a few details, feeling as we did so that we were the very worst of botchers. We doubt now whether the old and simple story was not the better of the two. Then, after another lengthened interview, we sent our pupil back to create her skeletons. When she came with the skeletons, we were dear friends, and learned to call her Mary. Then it was that she first sat at our editorial table, and wrote a love letter to the curate. It was then midwinter, wanting but a few days to Christmas, and Arthur, as she called him, did not like the cold weather. "He does not say so," she said, "but I fear that he is ill. Don't you think there are some people with whom everything is unfortunate?" She wrote her letter, and had recovered her spirits before she took her leave. We then proposed to her to bring her mother to dine with us on Christmas Day. We had made a clean breast of it at home in regard to our heart flutterings, and had been met with a suggestion that some kindness might with propriety be shown to the old lady as well as to the young one. We had felt grateful to the old lady for not coming to our office with her daughter, and at once assented. When we made the suggestion to Mary, there came at first a blush over all her face, and then there followed the well-known smile before the blush was gone. "You'll all be dressed fine," she said. We protested that not a garment would be changed by any of the family after the decent church going in the morning. "Just as I am?" she asked. "Just as you are," we said, looking at the dear grey frock, adding some mocking assertion that no possible combination of millinery could improve her. "And mamma will be just the same?" "Then we will come," she said. We told her an absolute falsehood as to some necessity which would take us in a cab to Euston Station on the afternoon of that Christmas Day, so that we could call and bring them both to our house without trouble or expense. "You shan't do anything of the kind," she said. However, we swore to our falsehood, perceiving as we did so that she did not believe a word of it. But in the matter of the cab we had our own way. We found the mother to be what we had expected, a weak, ladylike, lachrymose old lady, endowed with a profound admiration for her daughter, and so bashful that she could not at all enjoy her plum pudding. We think that Mary did enjoy hers thoroughly. She made a little speech to the mistress of the house, praising ourselves with warm words and tearful eyes, and immediately won the heart of a new friend. She allied herself warmly to our daughters, put up with the schoolboy pleasantries of our sons, and before the evening was over was dressed up as a ghost for the amusement of some neighbouring children who were brought in to play snapdragon. Mrs. Gresley, as she drank her tea and crumbled her bit of cake, seated on a distant sofa, was not so happy, partly because she remembered her old gown, and partly because our wife was a stranger to her. Mary had forgotten both circumstances before the dinner was half over. She was the sweetest ghost that ever was seen. How pleasant would be our ideas of departed spirits if such ghosts could visit us frequently! They repeated their visits to us not unfrequently during the 12 months, but as the whole interest attaching to our intercourse had reference to circumstances which took place in that editorial room of ours, it will not be necessary to refer further to the hours, very pleasant to ourselves, which she spent with us in our domestic life. She was ever made welcome when she came, and was known by us as a dear, well-bred, modest, clever little girl. The novel went on. That catalogue of the skeletons gave us more trouble than all the rest, and many were the tears which she shed over it, and sad were the misgivings by which she was afflicted, though never vanquished. How was it to be expected that a girl of 18 should portray characters such as she had never known? In her intercourse with the curate all the intellect had been on her side. She had loved him because it was requisite to her to love some one, and now as she had loved him she was as true as steel to him. But there had been almost nothing for her to learn from him. The plan of the novel went on, and as it did so we became more and more despondent as to its success. And through it all we knew how contrary it was to our own judgment to expect, even to dream of, anything but failure. Though we went on working with her, finding it to be quite impossible to resist her entreaties, we did tell her from day to day that, even presuming she were entitled to hope for ultimate success, she must go through an apprenticeship of 10 years before she could reach it. Then she would sit silent, repressing her tears, and searching for arguments with which to support her cause. "Working hard is apprenticeship," she said to us once. "Yes, Mary, but the work will be more useful and the apprenticeship more wholesome if you will take them for what they are worth." "I shall be dead in 10 years," she said. "If you thought so you would not intend to marry Mr. Dunn. But even were it certain that such would be your fate, how can that alter the state of things? The world would know nothing of that. And if it did, would the world buy your book out of pity?" "I want no one to pity me," she said, "but I want you to help me." So we went on helping her. At the end of 4 months she had not put pen to paper on the absolute body of her projected novel, and yet she had worked daily at it, arranging its future construction. During the next month, when we were in the middle of March, a gleam of real success came to her. We had told her frankly that we would publish nothing of hers in the periodical which we were ourselves conducting. She had become too dear to us for us not to feel that, were we to do so, we should be doing it rather for her sake than for that of our readers. But we did procure for her the publication of 2 short stories elsewhere. For these she received 12 guineas, and it seemed to her that she had found an El Dorado of literary wealth. I shall never forget her ecstasy when she knew that her work would be printed, or her renewed triumph when the first humble cheque was given into her hands. There are those who will think that such a triumph, as connected with literature, must be sordid. For ourselves, we are ready to acknowledge that money payment for work done is the best and most honest test of success. We are sure that it is so felt by young barristers and young doctors, and we do not see why rejoicing on such realization of long-cherished hope should be more vile with the literary aspirant than with them. "What do you think I'll do first with it?" she said. We thought she meant to send something to her lover, and we told her so. "I'll buy mamma a bonnet to go to church in. I didn't tell you before, but she hasn't been these 3 Sundays because she hasn't one fit to be seen." I changed the cheque for her, and she went off and bought the bonnet. Though I was successful for her in regard to the 2 stories, I could not go beyond that. We could have filled pages of periodicals with her writing had we been willing that she should work without remuneration. She herself was anxious for such work, thinking that it would lead to something better, but we opposed it, and indeed would not permit it, believing that work so done can be serviceable to none but those who accept it that pages may be filled without cost. During the whole winter, while she was thus working, she was in a state of alarm about her lover. Her hope was ever that when warm weather came he would again be well and strong. We know nothing sadder than such hope founded on such source. For does not the winter follow the summer, and then again come the killing spring? At this time she used to read us passages from his letters, in which he seemed to speak of little but his own health. In her literary ambition he never seemed to have taken part since she had declared her intention of writing profane novels. As regarded him, his sole merit to us seemed to be in his truth to her. He told her that in his opinion they two were as much joined together as though the service of the Church had bound them. But even in saying that he spoke ever of himself and not of her. Well, May came, dangerous, doubtful, deceitful May, and he was worse. Then for the first time the dread word consumption passed her lips. It had already passed ours, mentally, a score of times. We asked her what she herself would wish to do. Would she desire to go down to Dorsetshire and see him? She thought a while, and said that she would wait a little longer. The novel went on, and at length, in June, she was writing the actual words on which, as she thought, so much depended. She had really brought the story into some shape in the arrangement of her chapters, and sometimes even I began to hope. There were moments in which with her hope was almost certainty. Towards the end of June Mr. Don declared himself to be better. He was to have a holiday in August, and then he intended to run up to London and see his betrothed. He still gave details which were distressing to us of his own symptoms, but it was manifest that he himself was not desponding, and she was governed in her trust or in her despair altogether by him. But when August came the period of his visit was postponed. The heat had made him weak, and he was to come in September. Early in August we ourselves went away for our annual recreation. Not that we shoot grouse, or that we have any strong opinion that August and September are the best months in the year for holiday making, but that everybody does go in August. We ourselves are not specially fond of August. In many places to which one goes a-touring, mosquitoes bite in that month. The heat, too, prevents one from walking. The inns are all full, and the railways crowded. April and May are twice pleasanter months in which to see the world and the country. But fashion is everything, and no man or woman will stay in town in August for whom there exists any practicability of leaving it. We went on the 10th, just as though we had a moor, and one of the last things we did before our departure was to read and revise the last written chapter of Mary's story. About the end of September we returned, and up to that time the lover had not come to London. Immediately on our return we wrote to Mary, and the next morning she was with us. She had seated herself on her usual chair before she spoke, and we had taken her hand and asked after herself and her mother. Then, with something of mirth in our tone, we demanded the work which she had done since our departure. "He is dying," she replied. She did not weep as she spoke. It was not on such occasions as this that the tears filled her eyes. But there was in her face a look of fixed and settled misery which convinced us that she at least did not doubt the truth of her own assertion. We muttered something as to our hope that she was mistaken. "The doctor there has written to tell mamma that it is so. Here is his letter." The doctor's letter was a good letter, written with more of assurance than doctors can generally allow themselves to express. "I fear that I am justified in telling you," said the doctor, "that it can only be a question of weeks." We got up and took her hand. There was not a word to be uttered. "I must go to him," she said after a pause. "Well, yes, it will be better." "But we have no money." It must be explained now that offers of slight, very slight, pecuniary aid had been made by us both to Mary and to her mother on more than one occasion. These had been refused with adamantine firmness, but always with something of mirth, or at least of humour, attached to the refusal. The mother would simply refer to the daughter, and Mary would declare that they could manage to see the 12-month through and go back to Cornborough without becoming absolute beggars. She would allude to their joint wardrobe, and would confess that there would not have been a pair of boots between them but for that 12 guineas, and indeed she seemed to have stretched that modest incoming so as to cover a legion of purchases. And of these things she was never ashamed to speak. We think there must have been at least 2 grey frocks, because the frock was always clean, and never absolutely shabby. Our girls at home declared that they had seen 3. Of her frock, as it happened, she never spoke to us, but the new boots and the new gloves, and ever so many things that I can't tell you about, which we really couldn't have gone without, all came out of the 12 guineas. That she had taken not only with delight but with triumph. But pecuniary assistance from ourselves she had always refused. "It would be a gift," she would say. "Have it as you like." "But people don't give other people money." "Don't they? That's all you know about the world." "Yes, to beggars. We hope we needn't come to that." It was thus that she always answered us, but always with something of laughter in her eye, as though their poverty was a joke. Now, when the demand upon her was for that which did not concern her personal comfort, which referred to a matter felt by her to be vitally important, she declared without a minute's hesitation that she had not money for the journey. "Of course you can have money," we said. "I suppose you will go at once?" "Oh yes, at once. That is, in a day or 2, after he shall have received my letter. Why should I wait?" We sat down to write a cheque, and she, seeing what we were doing, asked how much it was to be. "No, half that will do," she said. "Mamma will not go. We have talked it over and decided it. Yes, I know all about that. I am going to see my lover, my dying lover, and I have to beg for the money to take me to him. Of course I am a young girl, but in such a condition am I to stand upon the ceremony of being taken care of? A housemaid wouldn't want to be taken care of at 18. We did exactly as she bade us, and then attempted to comfort her while the young man went to get money for the cheque. What consolation was possible? It was simply necessary to admit with frankness that sorrow had come from which there could be no present release. "Yes," she said, "time will cure it, in a way. One dies in time, and then of course it is all cured. One hears of this kind of thing often," she said afterwards, still leaning forward in her chair, still with something of the old expression in her eyes, something almost of humour in spite of her grief. "But it is the girl who dies. When it is the girl there isn't after all so much harm done. A man goes about the world and can shake it off. And then there are plenty of girls." We could not tell her how infinitely more important, to our thinking, was her life than that of him whom she was going to see now for the last time. But there did spring up within our mind a feeling greatly opposed to that conviction which formerly we had endeavoured to impress upon herself, that she was destined to make for herself a successful career. She went and remained by her lover's bedside for 3 weeks. She wrote constantly to her mother, and once or twice to ourselves. She never again allowed herself to entertain a gleam of hope, and she spoke of her sorrow as a thing accomplished. In her last interview with us she had hardly alluded to her novel, and in her letters she never mentioned it. But she did say one word which made us guess what was coming. "You will find me greatly changed in one thing," she said. "So much changed that I need never have troubled you." The day for her return to London was twice postponed, but at last she was brought to leave him. Stern necessity was too strong for her. Let her pinch herself as she might, she must live down in Dorsetshire, and could not live on his means, which were as narrow as her own. She left him, and on the day after her arrival in London she walked across from Euston Square to our office. "Yes," she said, "it is all over. I shall never see him again on this side of heaven's gates." We do not know that we ever saw a tear in her eyes produced by her own sorrow. She was possessed of some wonderful strength which seemed to suffice for the bearing of any burden. Then she paused, and we could only sit silent, with our eyes fixed upon the rug. "I have made him a promise," she said at last. Of course we asked her what was the promise, though at the moment we thought that we knew. "I will make no more attempt at novel writing." "Such a promise should not have been asked or given," we said vehemently. "It should have been asked, because he thought it right," she answered, "and of course it was given. Must he not know better than I do? Is he not one of God's ordained priests? In all the world is there one so bound to obey him as I?" There was nothing to be said for it at such a moment as that. There is no enthusiasm equal to that produced by a deathbed parting. "I grieve greatly," she said, "that you should have had so much vain labour with a poor girl who can never profit by it." "I don't believe the labour will have been vain," we answered, having altogether changed those views of ours as to the futility of the pursuit which she had adopted. "I have destroyed it all," she said. "What? Burned the novel?" "Every scrap of it. I told him that I would do so, and that he should know that I had done it. Every page was burned after I got home last night, and then I wrote to him before I went to bed." "Do you mean that you think it wicked that people should write novels?" we asked. "He thinks it to be a misapplication of God's gifts, and that has been enough for me. He shall judge for me, but I will not judge for others. And what does it matter? I do not want to write a novel now." They remained in London till the end of the year for which the married curate had taken their house, and then they returned to Cornborough. We saw them frequently while they were still in town, and dispatched them by the train to the north just when the winter was beginning. At that time the young clergyman was still living down in Dorsetshire, but he was lying in his grave when Christmas came. Mary never saw him again, nor did she attend his funeral. She wrote to us frequently then, as she did for years afterwards. "I should have liked to have stood at his grave," she said, "but it was a luxury of sorrow that I wished to enjoy, and they who cannot earn luxuries should not have them. They were going to manage it for me here, but I knew that I was right to refuse it." Right, indeed. As far as we knew her, she never moved a single point from what was right. All these things happened many years ago. Mary Gresley, on her return to Cornborough, apprenticed herself, as it were, to the married curate there, and called herself, I think, a female Scripture reader. I know that she spent her days in working hard for the religious aid of the poor around her. From time to time we endeavoured to instigate her to literary work, and she answered our letters by sending us wonderful little dialogues between Tom the Saint and Bob the Sinner. We are in no humour to criticize them now, but we can assert that though that mode of religious teaching is most distasteful to us, the literary merit shown even in such works as these was very manifest. And there came to be apparent in them a gleam of humour, which would sometimes make us think that she was sitting opposite to us and looking at us, and that she was Tom the Saint, and that we were Bob the Sinner. We said what we could to turn her from her chosen path, throwing into our letters all the eloquence and all the thought of which we were masters, but our eloquence and our thoughts were equally in vain. At last, when 8 years had passed over her head after the death of Mr. Donne, she married a missionary who was going out to some forlorn country on the confines of African colonization, and there she died. We saw her on board the ship in which she sailed, and before we parted there had come that tear into her eyes, the old look of supplication on her lips, and the gleam of mirth across her face. We kissed her once, for the first and only time, as we bade God bless her. End of Mary Gresley. End of Section 4. Recording by Arnold Banner, Thurmond, North Carolina.